Chapter 10. Shuyi felt a little regretful at his smile. If I knew it earlier, it would be better to just say, "Do you have any opinion on me?" At least the other party can give a yes or no answer. Now he's just standing there smiling, but the smile doesn't seem to reach his eyes, so no one would be embarrassed. Shi Yan took a step forward, getting closer to her. "Why do you feel that I want to see you?" Shuyi confidently puffed out his chest, and threw the question back. "Then what do you mean you stuck on my manuscript 3 times? These words are neither humble nor overbearing, with a firm attitude, and this set of logic is clearly displayed, which has a little brainwashing effect. That's right, my manuscript is so well written that even the most professional editor-in-chief can't fault it. You carded me 3 times, besides wanting to see me, is there any other reason?" But Shi Yan just said lightly, "Not satisfied. Not satisfied. Where are you not satisfied?" With the wind blowing, Shuyi closed up his scarf, looking aggressive like a small machine gun, with his chin raised high. "You pointed out one by one, and I'll change them one by one. I don't believe it won't work." She looked closely at Shi Yan, not relaxing at all. "It's a pity that some people don't take this set." Shi Yan chuckled, not intending to tangle with her, and wanted to leave. Punching on the cotton, Shuyi took a breath of cold air to refresh himself, then turned around and grabbed Shi Yan's wrist. When Shi Yan turned her head, she saw Shuyi's chin raised, and the lights were shining brightly in her eyes. "Otherwise, you just want to see me." After being speechless for a while, Shi Yan turned his head. His eyes remained on Shuyi's face, but he pulled out his hand inch by inch. Shuyi's hands froze in the air. It's over just when Shuyi was about to find a step for himself to go down, and then went back home, the person in front suddenly said, "Then come here." Shuyi was stunned for a moment. Shi Yan had already turned and walked towards the elevator. She couldn't hold back. She smiled triumphantly at Shi Yan's back, and then trotted after him. Along the way, Shi Yan didn't speak. Shuyi also wisely kept silent, carefully maintaining this ice-like balance. She clearly understood that she was making trouble for no reason, but she just didn't know whether the person next to her was really playing tricks or just teasing her. "If you say a few more words at this moment, maybe this balance will be broken." When the elevator arrived, Shi Yan went straight out. On this floor, he was the only one in the house, and it was quiet everywhere, and there was no one else. It seemed that the light and heavy footsteps of the two were particularly obvious. After Shi Yan pressed his fingerprint, the door opened automatically. All the way was unimpeded. Shi Yan strode like a star, without stopping his eyes anywhere. He walked directly to a table in the living room, looked back at Shuyi, but curled his index finger, and tapped twice on the table. "Sit here and change." Shuyi felt a little speechless for a moment. "Do you really think that I am here to revise the manuscript?" Reluctantly, she walked over, took out her notebook and sat down. Taking advantage of the power on, Shuyi secretly stared at Shi Yan. After arranging Shuyi, he acted like a normal person, answered the phone, whispered, took off his coat, walked to a row of dark cabinets, and took out a cup. The moment she turned around, Shuyi immediately changed his face, revealing a shy look in his eyes. It's a pity that Shi Yan didn't look at her at all. Holding the phone in one hand and the cup in the other, he walked towards the wine cabinet. "Shuyi, it seems that every man returns to his own home, no matter how docile his white shirt is, it will be messy." Shuyi didn't know when Shi Yan undid a button. The front was a little loose, stretched to the waistline, and was tucked in by the straight suit trousers, and his legs were very present in this huge room. He put the glass on the table casually, picked up the decanter, and hung up the phone while pouring the wine. The moment he picked up the cup, he turned his head and looked at Shuyi. "Do you want some water?" Because his series of actions just now were too idle, Shuyi once thought that he had forgotten his existence. When asked suddenly by him at this moment, Shuyi came back to his senses and nodded. "I want to drink the one you drank. It's wine." Shuyi's pupils are black and bright, her eyes are delicate and expressive, so she has always been very good at taking advantage of her eyes. She nodded and looked up into Shi Yan's eyes. "I know." Shi Yan didn't say anything, and poured her a glass. When the wine glass was placed in front of him, it collided with the table with a crisp sound. Shuyi smiled slightly amidst the noise. However, before the smile spread, Shi Yan walked away. Shuyi muttered a few words without saying a word, picked it up and took a sip. The alcohol content is not low, Shuyi knows it. But she is more aware of her drinking capacity. It's very intelligent and can be adjusted according to her own needs. She can drink 1,000 glasses without getting drunk, or she can pour it down when she touches it. The manuscript had already been opened, and Shuyi had no choice but to get down to business. And Shi Yan sat by the window, turned on a floor lamp, leaned back in the chair loosely, and sank into the night. A few minutes later, the cell phone rang to break the silence. Shi Yan's voice was not loud, but Shuyi could hear it clearly. He picked it up, flipping a book with the other hand, and said casually, "No need." It was Shuyi who called. A friend of hers went to Hungary some time ago, so she specifically asked him to bring back 2 bottles of century-old noble rot from the auction there. Not long after the person got off the plane, Shuyi picked up the goods and was looking forward to sending them to Shi Yan to please him. How? Shuyi asked a question. Shi Yan raised his head, and as far as he could see, the glass of the floor-to-ceiling windows reflected Shuyi's figure. In fact, he could clearly see that Shuyi was not looking at the computer, but looking at him. Inconvenient. Shi Yan's tone was relaxed, and it definitely wasn't an official inconvenience. Shuyi blinked and asked tentatively, "What's the matter, Jinwu Zongjiao?" "About work." Shi Yan withdrew his gaze and looked at the wine in the glass. "Is there anything else?" This sentence is a disguised order to chase away guests. "Then when will you finish your work? I will send it to you." "Need not." After speaking, he hung up the phone. Listening to the beeping sound in the earphones, Shuyi was stunned for a while. The lights outside the window are just coming on, and the traffic under the night is like a dynamic painting. The room is quiet, the lighting is gentle, the two of them are quiet, only the soft keyboard sounds from time to time. After a while, a soft voice came from the person behind him. "Mr. Shi, I've changed it. Would you like to take a look?" Shi Yan got up a little slower, and just as he turned his head, Shuyi walked towards her with the computer in his arms. Obviously a pair of long legs, stiletto high heels, protruding mature curves, but people laugh harmlessly. Shi Yan didn't say a word. Shuyi squatted beside him, holding the computer in front of him with both hands. Shi Yan took the computer with one hand, put it on the small table beside him, and swiped the touch screen with his fingers. When he was reading the manuscript, he glanced out of the corner of his eye and found that Shuyi hadn't stood up, but was still squatting there, looking at him with his head half tilted. Looking at it from this angle, it seems to have rested its chin on his lap. Shi Yan's eyelids twitched, and the words "Jinwu Zongjiao" jumped into his mind inexplicably. This press release has more than 3,000 words, and it only took 3 minutes for Shi Yan to read it. The hour hand on the wall pointed to 8 o'clock, and it was completely dark. From the corner of the eye, I saw layers of dark clouds outside the window, as if it was going to rain. Maybe God wants to keep people. How about it? Shuyi looked at him expectantly. Too verbose. While talking, Shi Yan handed the computer back to her. Shuyi. Fine. Shuyi took the phone and sat back, and began to change it again. This time she really played it up. Why are there so many demands, and why are you so hard on her? Over there, he was writing a book, but Shi Yan put his legs on the leg stool, bathed in the light, and took a nap with his eyes closed. The shadows of the green plants swayed slightly on the ground, and the sound of keyboard tapping filled the entire space, sometimes rushing and sometimes stopping. It's like playing with the wind, inexplicably harmonious. Shi Yan closed his eyes for more than half an hour, until Shuyi came over with the computer again. When Shi Yan opened his eyes, he first glanced at his watch. It's been simplified a lot. Shuyi said, "Is there any question?" Shi Yan pointed to one of them and said, "That's not what I said." "Then what do you mean?" Shi Yan rolled his eyelids. "Think for yourself. Otherwise, I'll write it for you directly." While spending more than half an hour thinking about that sentence, Shuyi unknowingly finished drinking the wine at hand. When she took the computer to look for Shi Yan again, she didn't realize that blush had already climbed up her cheeks. When Shi Yan took over the computer, his eyes first fell on the time in the lower right corner. It is very late. After half a minute. Okay, Shuyi, who has been hit many times, is not used to it, really. Shi Yan raised his eyes to look over, and the scent of shampoo with a hint of alcohol rushed into his nasal cavity involuntarily. Is there really no place to modify? Shuyi resisted the urge to snort coldly, still smiling sweetly, but couldn't help but want to hold a gun in his words. I can still change it, I don't care. Shi Yan was still in the same position, looking down at her. Are you okay? It doesn't matter if you stay in a man's house for so long, your boyfriend. Shuyi's smile slowly disappeared, lowered his eyes, and whispered, I don't have a boyfriend anymore. Shi Yan raised his eyebrows. Shuyi looked at him as if he didn't believe it, and added, "Really, I went back and broke up with him that night when you were the first time." When she said this, she was afraid that he would not be able to understand what she meant, so she added the premise of the night I met you for the first time without any trace. Anyway, it is telling the truth, how to understand it is a matter of Shi Yan. Shi Yan didn't answer immediately, but looked at her deeply for a few seconds. So what? So, Shuyi didn't expect him to ask such a question. The wine that he drank began to rise, and besides his whole body was a little hot, his brain was also a little hot. Shuyi looked at him intently, cautiously in his eyes, and gently pulled his sleeve with his fingers. "Then can I chase you?" After saying this, Shuyi stared at Shi Yan closely, not letting go of his emotions. But Shi Yan's expression didn't seem to fluctuate. After a moment of silence, his voice was calm. "If I say no, will you stop?" Shuyi blurted out, "No." "Shi Yan, then why are you asking me?" Chapter 11. It hadn't rained yet that night, but the thunder kept ringing, sometimes near and far away, and occasionally a thunderbolt struck the ground, scaring the kittens on the side of the road to run around. Just as Shuyi walked out of the building, a gust of wind blew over the fallen leaves, which was bitingly cold. The gloomy sky was accompanied by thunder, adding to the coolness. Shuyi breathed a sigh of relief, and silently wrapped his scarf tightly. It was a few hundred meters away from here to the gate. Although the street lights were on, Shuyi subconsciously quickened his pace. The road is spacious and open, with no vehicles coming or obstacles, and the searchlight at the end can be seen at a glance. Under the bright yellow light, Shuyi saw a woman walking towards her. She was dressed flamboyantly, with a fluffy black fur jacket, and her high-heeled shoes were stomping, and she was carrying a small suitcase in her hand. It was hard not to attract people's attention. Shuyi took a few glances, and immediately recognized that the person who came was Qin Shuriwe. It's not surprising to see her here. After all, the rich second generation may just live here, or they may come here to find friends and relatives. But Qin Shuriwe was a little surprised to see Shuyi here. She got closer, and it wasn't until the two of them were only 2 meters away that she was sure she was right. This distance is not embarrassing, and it is impossible to bypass it as if you didn't see it. When he was struggling, Shuyi fixed his eyes on her. "Coincidentally, why are you here?" "Oh." Qin Shuriwe replied subconsciously, "I'm here to find someone." The weather was so cold that Shuyi had no intention of standing here and chatting with her. "It might rain early tonight, don't forget your umbrella when you go to work tomorrow." After explaining, the two nodded and walked in their original directions. But Qin Shuriwe turned his head 3 times a step at a time, kept looking at Shuyi's back, and muttered something. Why is she here? This doubt was quickly blown away by the cold wind. Standing at the door of Shi Yan's house, Qin Shuriwe held the small suitcase to her chest, and showed a flattering smile at the mirror of the door rail. When she was about to ring the doorbell, she suddenly froze for a moment, drooped her eyebrows and eyes, and posed a tired look. After a while, the door opened automatically. "Uncle." Qin Shuriwe shuffled in. "Are you done?" No one answered. Qin Shuriwe poked her head and looked around. There is no one in the living room or corridor. What about people? Where's Xiao Jiao? There were no traces left, except for a glass on the table. Qin Shuriwe has good eyesight, so she can see the lipstick mark on the mouth of the cup at a glance. Sure enough, there was Jiao. She froze for a moment, and an idea suddenly popped into her mind. I met Shuyi on the road just now. Could it be because she has been at Shi Yan's house tonight? And she saw that Shuyi had been writing interviews for Shi Yan these days, so the two should know each other. What are you doing? When Shi Yan's voice suddenly came from behind, Qin Shuriwe was startled, and took a few steps back holding the small box. Shi Yan came out of the room with pajamas in his hand. Without looking at Qin Shuriwe, he went straight to the bathroom. Uncle, Qin Shuriwe ran over with a small suitcase in his arms. Are you alone? Shi Yan stopped, glanced at the things in her hand, and asked, Aren't you going home so late? I'll bring you wine. Qin Shuriwe opened the box and showed the contents to Shi Yan. I thought about it. Maybe I will have to work overtime in the next few days, and I don't have much time, so I will bring you the good things quickly. Sending a drink is something that can be done by sending someone casually, so she must do it herself. Shi Yan has heard too many times of the miserable news in these words, and he has long been immune to it. Put it over there. Shi Yan pointed to the wine cabinet. Qin Shuriwe immediately walked over courteously, and then heard Shi Yan say, then go home. After the wine was put away, Shuyi prepared to go back home with a sullen face. But when passing by Shi Yan, she glanced at the glass on the table out of the corner of her eye. Without turning her head, she asked directly, Uncle, do you have guests at home tonight? Who is it? After Shuyi asked, she regretted it. Through the lens, she saw Shi Yan's eyes sinking, declaring that his patience was exhausted. Uncle, you should rest early. Before leaving, Shuyi didn't forget to add, I didn't get off work until after 8 o'clock today, and I haven't eaten yet, so I'll go home and have something to eat. When she was gone, Shi Yan's eyes slowly fell on the glass. The rim of the cup was crystal clear, and under the light, a touch of reddish was somewhat blurred. The rain that night finally fell when Shuyi arrived home. Fortunately, he didn't get caught in the rain. She walked quickly back to the room, took off her coat, and sat on the bed in a daze for a while. The gurgling rain outside the window made the room extraordinarily quiet, making it easy for people to fall into a certain mood. Suddenly, the phone rang. Shuyi took out her phone, and a new WeChat message popped up directly on the lock screen. Her heart skipped a beat, and her thoughts went back to more than half an hour ago. After Shi Yan finished asking, how could she answer? Probably because of a twitch at the time, he stared at him and said, isn't this going through the process to give you a little respect? The end of this sentence is that Shi Yan issued an order to evict guests. Under such circumstances, Shuyi certainly wouldn't hang around at his house. She packed her things neatly, and when she walked to the door, she waved to Shi Yan by the window. Good night, Mr. Shi. She tilted her head, her long hair falling from her shoulders like a waterfall. I'll add you on WeChat when I go back. Shi Yan remained silent, turned around and looked at Shuyi from afar. The distance was too far. Shuyi couldn't see Shi Yan's eyes clearly, so he decided to live in his own spiritual world. I will chat with you when you are bored. I'm good at chatting. The kind with a lot of emojis. She saw Shi Yan's mouth twitched. The next second, he raised his hand and fished something from the small table. Immediately afterwards, the door behind Shuyi opened automatically. Shuyi, her smile only lasted until the moment she walked out the door. On the way home, her heart was heavy. But when she got home now, she thought about it carefully and felt that the situation was actually good. At least, Shi Yan didn't say he wouldn't chase after her. Then take it as his acquiescence. And the WeChat reminder at this moment may be a friend verification message sent by him. So Shuyi was not in a hurry to take a bath. As if seeing the loss of victory, he rolled on the bed and swiped open the lock screen excitedly. The moment the WeChat popped up, she froze. Oh, it wasn't a friend request from Shi Yan, but a message from a college roommate. By Ruishan, did you break up with Yu Xingzhou? Shuyi, yes. By Ruishan, why didn't you say it? Shuyi, I have been too busy during this time, so I didn't take care of it. Shuyi, how do you know? By Ruishan, I saw the circle of friends he posted, a photo with a woman. Shuyi was silent for a while. Shuyi, show me. By Ruishan immediately sent her the photo. In the picture, the two are snuggling together. Qin is biting the spoon, pinching Yu Xingzhou's chin with his fingers, smiling sweetly. The rain was getting heavier and heavier, crackling down, accompanied by thunder, as if to pierce the sky. When Shuyi quit the photo, Bai Ruishan had sent her several messages one after another. Bai Ruishan, I think he thought he was a peerless good man because of his obsession with you. Bai Ruishan, damn it, this girl looks average, is he blind? I couldn't believe it at first, thought it was my sister or something. Bai Ruishan, this world is magical, don't you want to find such a foolish woman with a school bell? In fact, in all fairness, Qin is not ugly, with fair skin, a small face, a pointed chin, and a pair of red phoenix eyes. If you were someone else, you would think she was a pure little beauty. It's just that in Bai Ruishan's eyes, seeing a bright and beautiful woman like Shuyi every day for 4 years in college, clear soup and side dishes like Qin are not enough. Bai Ruishan, how did you break up? Shuyi, he cheated. Bai Ruishan, just hit this woman. Shuyi, yes. Bai Ruishan, I think he's out of his mind, right? Shuyi, because this woman's family is rich. Bai Ruishan, hey, this is flying on a branch and turning into a phoenix. Bai Ruishan, this story tells us that the phoenix man can't talk to me. He said nirvana and he's nirvana. I don't even know what happened to burn you to death. After finishing the conversation with Bai Ruishan, Shuyi's mind was buzzing. If someone shares the same hatred, that emotion will be infinitely magnified. She sat up, squeezed her phone and took a breath for a while, so she opened the phone's address book in WeChat. After looking around, there is no friend information of Shi Yan. Okay, she copied Shi Yan's phone number again, but still couldn't find his WeChat. It seems that it is set that you cannot add friends by number. Shuyi's teeth were itchy. He could only open the text message box full of verification codes and spam messages, and sent a text message to Shi Yan. Shuyi, I'm home, smiley face. Shuyi, Mr. Shi, have you rested yet? There was no movement in the text box until I came out of the shower. In the middle of the night, Shuyi was dragged by a certain consciousness and woke up in a daze. She reached out her hand under the pillow and took out her phone, half closed her eyes and opened the text message, but Shi Yan still didn't reply her. Her eyes couldn't hold her anymore, and when the phone slipped from her palm, she fell asleep completely. After a while, the phone next to the pillow finally vibrated. Even such a small movement woke up Shuyi. She couldn't keep her eyes open, so she narrowed her eyes, took out her cell phone and saw it was a text message from Shi Yan. Shuyi opened the text message ecstatically. Banquet, TD. Shuyi slowly opened his eyes wide, staring closely at the screen. It took her a while to realize what it meant. Shi Yan, you are poisonous. Shuyi was furious and threw the phone out forcefully. With a loud bang, Shuyi suddenly opened his eyes. In the darkness, she blinked again, and gradually saw the light coming in through the curtains. Consciousness gradually returned, and she reached out to touch the pillow again. The phone is still there. Quietly, there is no new news, and there is still no reply in Shi Yan's text message dialog box. It turned out that it was just a dream. Shi Yan didn't really reply TD to her. Nothing back. But Shuyi was still so annoyed by the time in the dream. In the middle of the night, when there was no one there, and it was raining heavily, a signing pen with the logo of Mingyu Bank engraved on it was broken off by Shuyi, and it was accurately thrown into the trash can. Chapter 12. In the early morning, when the rain had just stopped, people from the magazine came to work one after another. They came in to shake their umbrellas and pat their clothes, bringing a gust of chill. Shuyi didn't sleep well at night, and when she got up early, she found herself a little haggard, so she deliberately applied a mask for a while, and went out late, almost stepping into the office. She was not in good spirits, so she didn't notice that Qin Shiriwa looked at her several times. Although there was no evidence, Qin Shiriwa always felt that the person staying at Shi Yan's house last night was Shuyi. Until noon, Qin Shiriwa went downstairs to get the lunch brought to her by her aunt. In the rest area, she heard a few people chatting. Shuyi is too miserable. Mingyu got stuck with several manuscripts. I don't know if I offended someone. It must be. Her manuscripts are of high quality, and she has never been blocked by anyone. I see that she has taken her computer with her after get off work these days, so she must have stayed up all night. Yeah, it feels like everyone has lost weight. It's really miserable. Qin Shiriwa pondered carefully for a few minutes. She knew very well that Shi Yan arranged for her to come here because she had gone too far with her graduation work and wanted to grind her temper. Since she was required to practice, naturally she would not reveal her identity and background. Only a few senior executives of the magazine knew about it. Otherwise, if everyone favors her, she will just change to another place and become a princess and run amok. But experience belongs to experience, not without principles. With the status of the Shi family and the status of Shi Yan, they have always been used to being arrogant, so naturally they would not allow someone to treat and bully his little niece so harshly. She was miserable at home that day, and she didn't mean to target Shuyi, but just wanted to leave this place quickly. But the result now at least shows that Shi Yan still protects her. Qin Shiriwa let out a long sigh of relief, because the boredom caused by going to work has dissipated a lot. At the same time, she was also sure that Xiao Jiaojiao, who was at Shi Yan's house last night, was definitely not Shuyi. After Shi Yan's interview draft was over, Shuyi finally relaxed a bit, and sent Shi Yan a message if he had nothing to do. For several days in a row, good morning, good afternoon, good night, never say a word. It's okay to read a few words to him. Although he never came back, so Shuyi changed a note for him. Illiterate who can't type. This comforts myself, and my mood is much better. There was a regular meeting this afternoon. After the routine work report, Tang Yi said that there would be a press conference of Mingyu Bank the day after tomorrow. Shuyi, you go to this press conference. Shuyi asked Tang Yi, who are there? Tang Yi flipped through the information in the computer and gave her a list of names. Sometimes banquet. This should be Shi Yan's first public appearance at the press conference. Shuyi immediately smiled and nodded, okay. When the meeting ended, Tang Yizai added, oh yes, Shuyi, let's bring Qin Shuriwa to the press conference. Shuyi agreed. But when she went to inform Qin Shuriwa, she clearly felt that she was unwilling. Shuyi actually didn't understand why a rich second generation like Qin Shuriwa came to work in such a low-income company. I don't even understand why she forced herself to come to this press conference. In fact, she really didn't want to go, so she just told Tang Yi. Tang Yi has always been a talkative boss. At this moment, Qin Shuriwa not only had rejection written all over her hair, but was also completely black from head to toe. Those who didn't know it thought she was here for a funeral. Among the suits and leather shoes at the press conference, Qin Shuriwa's attire was particularly conspicuous. As soon as she entered, she froze. Careless thought that black cannot attract attention. There are more reporters than usual today, and most of them are male reporters. Shuyi stood in the back row, his side covered by the black skull, and he pulled Qin Shuriwa forward to push him away. What are you doing? Qin Shuriwa was flustered, but she didn't dare to speak loudly. Aren't there seats at the back? What are you going to do at the front? Shuyi, I can't hear you clearly in the back row. No, hey, you. Qin Shuriwa didn't dare to make big moves, so she could only let Shuyi drag her forward. However, when these male reporters saw Shuyi, they all made way for her. 2 men even gave up their front row seats. As soon as he was seated, Shuyi looked up at the rostrum before putting anything down. There are 7 nameplates on the blue-black table, and the one in the middle is engraved with the words Shi Yan. Shuyi took a long breath, as if the dust had settled. Some people are happy and some are sad. Qin Shuriwa hated press conferences the most. It was boring and boring. It was more hypnotic than a lullaby. It was like listening to a heavenly book. She couldn't understand a word, so she really didn't want to sit in the front row, lest Shi Yan find out when she dozed off. The venue was spacious, but it was crowded with people, and there were constant voices talking everywhere. Finally, amidst the host's introduction, the press conference officially began. The gate of the infield was opened, the rostrum was brightly lit, and Shi Yan came striding forward, tall and straight. The photographer has always been the most sensitive to vision. Almost at the moment when Shi Yan appeared, his nerves were naturally mobilized, and the shutters of the 4 cameras came one after another. He sat down under the eyes of everyone, lowered his head and adjusted his watch. When he looked up again, he looked straight at the first row. There was a momentary staggered line of sight. Shuyi met his gaze, but neither dodged nor dodged his eyes, looking straight at him. Just staring at each other for a moment, Shi Yan raised his eyebrows, and his gaze turned to other places lightly. There is no emotion. Shuyi sighed silently. Other participants filed in, and there was almost no other sound except for the sound of the shutter. Shuyi lowered her head to turn on the computer, put it on the table, and when she looked up again, she saw Shi Yan looking at her phone. Shuyi immediately took out his mobile phone and sent him a text message. Shuyi, Mr. Shi is super handsome today. Shuyi, super A. Shuyi, today's venue is not a press conference, but your charm conference. Shuyi, although I can't speak at the moment, I'm already screaming for you in my heart. 4 text messages were sent out in succession. Shuyi raised his eyes quietly, and frowned unobtrusively when he saw Shi Yan. He did see it. Shuyi grabbed the phone and entered again. Shuyi, I would rather wear high-heeled shoes on my left foot and leather shoes stuffed with stones on my right foot, and walk thousands of miles to climb Mount Everest, than see you frowning. After posting, Shuyi didn't frown when he saw Shi Yan. He directly buckled the phone on the table. Puff. Shuyi suddenly felt very relieved, and the corner of his mouth curled up in a small arc. It's just that she didn't have time to hold back her smile, and when she raised her eyes, she met Shi Yan's gaze. This time, he no longer has light eyes. The frame chased the cold light, and the pupils behind the lenses were deep and dark. When staring at a person closely, a sense of oppression lingered around Shuyi, invisible, with a sense of warning. Shuyi hesitated inexplicably, the curvature of the corners of his lips disappeared, and he lowered his head guiltily. Like a schoolboy caught playing a prank and waiting to be reprimanded, the press conference started as scheduled. Shi Yan was the first to speak, but he did not set up a reporter's question session, so the executive officer next to him started a new round of speeches. Shuyi typed quickly, and glanced at Shuyi next to her, but saw that she was hanging her head, her cheeks were a little red, and she was in a very nervous state. "What's wrong with you?" Shuyi asked in a low voice, uncomfortable. Shuyi glanced at the rostrum quickly. "I'm fine. Tell me if you're not feeling well." Shuyi moved closer, still not used to such occasions. Shuyi was a little annoyed, but she couldn't deny her nervousness, so she frowned and said, "Sure is always looking at me. I'm a little scared, for no reason." Hearing this, Shuyi raised his head, and sure enough, he met Shi Yan's gaze again. He didn't seem to mind that Shuyi noticed his sizing up, his expression didn't change, his eyes were indifferent. "Don't be nervous." Shuyi patted Shuyi's hand. "He's looking at me." Shuyi, pretty confident. The press conference was indeed long and dull. Shuyi was sleepy and nervous, unable to understand what these people were saying at all, hovering between wanting to sleep and not daring to sleep. After persisting for nearly an hour, she couldn't take it anymore, and told Shuyi that she was not feeling well and had to go outside to breathe. Shuyi didn't stop her, and soon, the seat next to her was empty. A male reporter who came late and didn't have a seat stood in the aisle for a long time. When he saw someone leaving his seat with a bag, he walked over with a bow. "Is there anyone else sitting here?" Shuyi estimated that Shuyi would not come back, so he shook his head. The male reporter sat down, looking at Shuyi, who was concentrating on typing from time to time. More than half an hour passed, and the reporter entered the stage of asking questions. The reporter's question was very meaningless, but the language was lengthy, and many people in the audience were impatient to listen. The male reporter next to Shuyi glanced at the badge hanging in front of him. The angle was wrong, and he couldn't see the name clearly. He could only see the title Financial Weekly, so he asked, "Are you a reporter from Financial Weekly?" N. Shuyi nodded, and after finishing typing the paragraph at hand, he turned to look at him and asked politely, "What about you?" "I'm a reporter for Jiangqing Daily." He smiled. "I was an intern at Financial Weekly when I just graduated." Shuyi let out an "oh." The male reporter picked the keyboard nervously with his fingers, and said again, "At that time, my team leader was Tang Yi. Did you know him?" "Well, she is also my current editor-in-chief." "Oh, has she become the editor-in-chief yet?" The male reporter muttered, "My name is He Boming. What about you?" Shuyi. "Oh, it's you." He Boming smiled. "I've read many of your articles, and they are very well written." "Well, thank you." "Well, let's add a WeChat, and we can call each other if we have any information in the future." After saying this, the host announced the intermission, so Shuyi turned to talk to him. "Well, okay. This kind of daily social interaction also involves work interests. Shuyi will naturally not refuse to have one more friend and one more information channel." She took out her mobile phone and opened WeChat and asked, "Shall I scan you or you scan me?" "Let me sweep you." "Good." Shuyi opened the QR code again, and pointed the phone screen at He Boming. When He Boming was holding the phone, Shuyi turned his chin slightly. She always felt that there was a line of sight on her. After scanning, she exited the QR code and opened the new friend interface, and at the same time, the feeling of sight was getting stronger and stronger. She raised her head suddenly and saw that Shi Yan was still sitting in the same position. Her eyes really fell on her. The eyes of the two met unexpectedly as Shuyi expected. The overhead light shone directly on him, casting a shadow on his frame. He just looked into Shuyi's eyes so blatantly. His eyes were a little careless, but there was a faint deterrent force in his eyes. Shuyi opened his mouth and was about to speak. When he put down the pen in his hand, his voice came along with the sound of the pen colliding with the table lightly. "Shuyi." This was the first time Shuyi heard him call her name. He even remembered her name. The very common 3 words, the 3 words that he had to hear countless times every day, were read out of his mouth, coldly, but Shuyi's heart jumped. She stared blankly at Shi Yan. "Come over." He dropped these 2 words, got up and left the rostrum.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, remember to subscribe to our channel for more captivating illustrated romance audiobooks. Don't miss out on our latest releases and be part of our growing community. Hit that subscribe button and embark on an enchanting journey with us.